Hello, Claire Couvrechef, SNCF RESEAU in France. I'm so sorry for my very French accent and for reading my text. I am the Vegetation and Fauna Management Referent for the Paris Region Network and co-pilot of the project we call Chosen Seeding with Petit, and we are talking about today. To introduce, I will explain the context of maintenance on railways. We have to admit that things have been changing for a few years now, and whatever the cause, the historical means of maintenance used no longer seem to be appropriate for part of the network. Added to this, our environmental concerns, which are pushing us to change, and SNCF RESEAU's decision in 2017 to stop using glyphosate in 2021. The implementation of a national program for the search for alternatives has become a lever for driving change and meeting this challenge, and our project is one of these branches. The railway network is made up of main tracks, where the trains run, and so-called service tracks, which are the backbone of the network, where the trains are parked. Our project concerns the latter, and in particular the edging tracks, where the thick layer of ballast that naturally prevents a vegetation from growing is disappearing in favor of a welcoming sandy earth-stone mixture, but also our runways. The pioneer plants that takes hold spread rapidly, and their volume no longer allows for track maintenance or the exercise of trades related to the traffic itself. These service tracks are not the core of the investment, and their renewal cycles are much longer, especially since the proportion of edging tracks represent a significant percentage of the 12,000 kilometers of service tracks on our network. These tracks initially have the same no vegetation standard imposed by our standards and difficult, if it's not impossible, to maintain. Chosen vegetation rather than suffer from it. Rather than finding a way to eradicate the vegetation, it is proposed to plant a mixture of tailor-made plant species that compete with those already present on the ground. It has been shown that the voluntary integration of vegetation cover has a significant impact of the management of unwanted vegetation. Our literature search leads us to the following fact. If the sown plants develop before the emergence of undesirable vegetation, they will prevent their germination, development, and especially seed production through negative interactions. It is on this basis that we launched two chosen seeding experiments. The experiments we carried out as follows. Selection of sites by opportunism, in priority for ease of implementation and monitoring in line with our needs. Selections of species and development of mixtures, which evolve according to feedback. Seeding, including site preparation, and monitoring, writing feedback, and updating. Although this practice of plant competition have been mastered in maintenance of a large number of infrastructures, but its implementation on a railway track is in a highly constrained environment is a first. We had to define collectively with all the activities of the network what was an acceptable vegetation in tracks. For example, the constraints of the maintainer and the user require that the tracks not be deformed. As a result, seeding should be grassy and have a root system that does not impact the track. The height shouldn't interfere with the visibility and of signals and track components. A consensus was reached on the height of the railhead, that is 10 centimeters. In order to limit accidents at work, woody and semi-woody plants will be banned. The plants must be resistant to extreme conditions and trampling and must be highly competitive to allow for flora inversion. Finally, we are aiming for a single annual mowing. This specification enabled the project team, both internal and in partnership, to select compatible species and to propose almost 20 mixtures to be tasted in 3 years. The chosen implementation technique is hydromulching, which consists of planting the vegetation by spraying a mixture of seeds, water, fertilizers, and mulch. This mixture has a protective effect against wind and predators, but also facilitates germination thanks to its high water retention capacity and the presence of biostimulants. Thanks to this technique, the plants grow better and take over from the undesirable ones, which they will gradually suffocate. This technique also has the advantage of requiring only a surface preparation of the soil. Our experience has shown that a final chemical treatment and a final mowing or clearing of the brush a few weeks before the seeding operation was one of the keys to the success of the chosen mixture. Seasonality is also a factor in the success of the work, and with autumn being the preferred time. With our intern, Clevenot, the project team has set up a follow-up of our sown plots with two axes of notation which are 8, acceptable or not, 10 centimeters or not, and cover by species on the surface of the quadrat. As you can see on the picture on the left, the notation is simple during the surveys. If the vegetation exceeds the wild height and prevents the components from being seen, the rating is unsatisfactory. If the vegetation is below 10 centimeters, the rating is acceptable. Cover is estimated as a percentage of the surface area covered at the time of the survey. Void, undesirable, and each species planted or present are noted and represented. And the survey are then summarized as an average comparison of the cover of each mixture monitored. Let's take the example of Dole site. The second site sown at the end of 2019. 3 years later, the control plot zone shows us a rate of empty cover that has not progressed since 2019. Undesirable species of almost 50%, a few acceptable species that were already in place are still here, and the appearance of sown species are at almost 25% this year. This share was in 2019 rather occupied by undesirable species and raises the question of the competition and dissemination of our seedings and the track concerned. For the 7 mixtures shown, although with slightly different results, the reduction in the cover of undesirable plants is clear and satisfactory at this stage of the experiment. The effect is weak on acceptable species. Concerning the opponing, more questions in the pipeline. Refining sowing densities and mixtures according to sites identified, availability of seeds on the market, in autonomous harvesting or in local partnership, the mode and seasonality of mowing, spring or late, mowing tools for annual maintenance to be developed, the possible retreat of our mixture and its possible recharge cycle, possible impact of seeds on the surrounding environment, implementation of biodiversity indicators on sown sites. To conclude, SNCF RESEAU really wants now to deploy nationally in the areas concerned. Thank you for your attention.
Please stay so we can have some questions.
If there are questions.
Thank you. Do you see a difference after seeding in the presence of invasive species along the tracks?
Do you see difference?
The presence of invasive species.
Yes, the difference. The invasive species are the same, but they are less present on the site. Yes. Yes, it's positive.
Thank you for your nice presentation. Just one question, how do you collect the seeds? From where? Is it regional or is it more wider? What kind of seeds do you use?
Of seeds? It's difficult for us. Before I knew the lobbying for the phytopharmaceutical products, and now I know the lobbying for seeds. Mm-hmm. So we try to work with the local market So, but they didn't accept in the first time to send, comment on dit vendre? Comment? To sell us each species separate. So now we work in collaboration with a big producer. But 3 years later, in France, there is an association that is called Végétal Local that worked in region with local seeds, and we try to work with them. Now we know the good species, species. So it's difficult, but step by step we go, and yes, on the good way. Sorry for my English.
Could you give us some examples for plants you are using?
Excuse me?
Could you give us some examples for species you're using?
Yesterday, I was in a Tasco visit, and I saw plants that are on a railway, because they are really common plants like achillea, trèfle, trifolium, really species that are really common, because we didn't want to introduce exotical species. Okay.
Thank you, Claire, for your presentation. I have one question. Did you measure as well the effects on biodiversity?
It's the next step.
Okay.
Thank you. It's on the opening. But just to answer, that's new for us, but before, with the undesirable plants, there were no fauna, really, it was really rare. And now there are lots of grasshopper, bees, and something like that. So I think it's positive. Okay.
You said you checked for environmental risks. Did you look into possible effects that you attract animals to a place where you don't want to have them, yes, like in between the tracks where they might die?
One of the point of the constraints was a mixture that is not appealing for animals, because we are on railway tracks, and it could be develop accidents for animals. But now we are working for a mixture that is. Je suis pas sûre de répondre à la question. Si, c'est ça? Oui. Yes, it's not appealing for big fauna. But we work to have a biodiversity and fun for too little fauna. You understand? Because it's dangerous for our trains and not compatible.
Yes, well, maybe just a note that my concern is, for example, for the small fauna, for amphibians, reptiles who find a place in between the tracks, maybe are more attracted when you vegetate it, and they're sucked up by passing trains, and they are killed already by the air pressure. So it's not only about big animals, I mean, but also you have to consider the small ones.
Yes. I'm not sure about this mixture is attractive for the big fauna, and the risk is not. Comment dit augmenter? J'arrive plus. Comment? Increase. Excuse me, because I work on the. I'm responsible of 3,800 kilometers of lines, and it's maybe 10,000 hectares to manage, and we manage the vegetation, the maintenance of the vegetation, to limit the accident between the train and the fauna. For example, when you open the landscape on certain points that were really where there were a lot of accidents, we constate that the accident disappeared because the animals can see the train arrive, and so they can go through the railway. And on these tracks, the train are going at maybe 30 kilometers max, So I think the risk is really, really small. Excuse me. I do like I can, no?
So, thank you, Claire. No, please stay. It's really, we could really tell that this is an engaging subject and that you've done something that people ask a lot about. And you could for sure say that working with railway and pesticides and the vegetation is a really important subject. I have one last question for you. At least for some parts of Europe, you could say that there are a very specific biodiversity for railway stations and tracks, and it normally uses bare soil, and it is the solitary bees and with very warm climate. So have you ever considered that, conclude this with, or combine this with actually natural establishment of seeds to have a more open vegetation? Because it seems like you get sometimes quite dense annual vegetation. Have you considered that, or would you like to go further in some way like that?
J'ai pas compris. Moi non plus. I didn't understand the question.
No, okay, so no, but the question was if you have considered if the vegetation can be too dense for some insects and those species that normally like this habitat.
It's an experimentation, so it's the first step. It's an experimentation, so it's the first step. A few years later, maybe it could be a question on a long list of questions, but you need to work. And if you have a question, I'm better by mail, so you can no, there is not my email. Maybe I will actualize my presentation to put my email on the first page.
For sure.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Claire.